the morning sun cast long shadows across the empty streets of Metro City as Dr. Sarah Chin hurried through the hospital corridors, her footsteps echoing against the sterile walls. She had been working the night shift at General Hospital when the first reports came in: strange attacks across the city, people biting others with an almost animalistic fury. What started as isolated incidents had rapidly escalated into something far more sinister. Marcus Rodriguez, a former military sergeant turned security guard, stood at his post in the hospital's main lobby, his trained eyes scanning the increasingly chaotic scene outside. Through the reinforced glass doors, he could see abandoned cars scattered across the street, their drivers having fled in panic. The distant sound of sirens had been constant for the past hour, but now an eerie silence was beginning to settle over the city. In the pediatric ward, Elena Vasquez, a quick-thinking nurse with 15 years of experience, was organizing the evacuation of young patients when she noticed something disturbing through the window. Groups of people were moving through the streets with an unnatural, jerky gait, their clothes torn and stained with what appeared to be blood. Their movements were coordinated yet primitive, like a pack of predators hunting together. The hospital's emergency broadcast system crackled to life, delivering a message that would change everything. Attention all citizens. This is not a drill. A biological outbreak has been confirmed in multiple sectors of the city. Those affected display extreme aggressive behavior and appear to be spreading the condition through direct contact. Seek immediate shelter and avoid all contact with infected individuals. Jake Morrison, a resourceful teenager who had been visiting his grandmother in the hospital, pressed his face against the window of her room on the third floor. His grandmother, Margaret, a retired teacher with a sharp mind despite her age, joined him in observing the chaos below. They watched in horror as a group of what could only be described as zombies surrounded a family trying to reach their car. The scene that unfolded was like something from a nightmare. The infected moved with purpose, overwhelming their victims through sheer numbers and relentless aggression. Dr. Chin burst into the room where the small group had gathered, her face pale with urgency. "We need to move now," she announced, her voice steady despite the terror in her eyes. "The infection is spreading faster than we anticipated. The military has been deployed, but they're struggling to contain it. We have maybe an hour before this area is completely overrun." Outside, the sound of military helicopters thundered overhead, their searchlights cutting through the morning haze as they surveyed the devastation below. Tank formations rolled down the main streets, their crews preparing for a battle unlike any they had trained for. The infected seemed drawn to the noise and movement, emerging from buildings and alleyways in growing numbers. The group quickly realized that their survival depended on working together. Marcus took charge of security, using his military training to assess threats and plan their movements. Dr. Chin provided medical knowledge about the infection, having studied the blood samples from the first victims. Elena coordinated the care of the other survivors they encountered, while Jake's youth and agility made him an excellent scout. Margaret, despite her age, proved invaluable with her knowledge of the city's layout and hidden passages. As they prepared to leave the hospital, they witnessed the first major confrontation between the military and the infected. Soldiers took defensive positions behind barricades, their weapons trained on the approaching horde. The zombies showed no fear, no hesitation. They simply advanced with single-minded determination. When the shooting began, the group realized that this wasn't just an outbreak, it was war. The infected displayed disturbing intelligence, using basic tactics and adapting to the military's strategies. They moved in coordinated waves, overwhelming defenses through sheer persistence. Some appeared to be directing others, suggesting a hierarchy or evolved intelligence that made them far more dangerous than mindless monsters. From their vantage point, the survivors watched as the city's carefully planned defenses began to crumble. The zombies' numbers seemed endless, and for every one that fell, two more appeared to take its place. The military's initial confidence was rapidly giving way to desperate retreat as they realized conventional tactics weren't enough against an enemy that felt no pain and showed no mercy. As explosions lit up the skyline and the sound of gunfire echoed through the streets, Dr. Chen made a chilling discovery in her research notes. The infection wasn't random, it was evolving, adapting to create more efficient predators. The war between humanity and the undead had only just begun, and the outcome was far from certain. The group knew they had to escape the city, but first they would have to survive the chaos erupting around them. The ultimate test of human survival against an undead army was about to begin, and every decision they made could mean the difference between life and death. The hospital's emergency exits had become death traps. Through the reinforced glass, Marcus could see infected individuals pressed against the doors, their bloodshot eyes scanning for any sign of movement inside. Their behavior was unnervingly organized. Some stood guard while others seemed to be communicating through guttural sounds and gestures. This wasn't the mindless horde the news reports had described. These creatures were learning, adapting, hunting with purpose. Dr. Chin spread the hospital blueprints across the nurses' station, her finger tracing alternative routes through the building. The service tunnels connect to the old subway maintenance system, she explained, her voice barely above a whisper. If we can reach the basement level, we might be able to get out without encountering the main groups outside. Margaret leaned over the map, her decades of teaching experience helping her quickly understand the complex layout. Elena had been monitoring the radio chatter from the emergency services, and the news grew worse by the hour. The military evacuation routes are compromised, she reported grimly. Highway 95 is completely blocked. They're saying the infected are using abandoned vehicles as barriers, almost like they're setting up checkpoints. Jake, who had been keeping watch at the window, turned with wide eyes. That's impossible. How can they be that smart? The answer came sooner than they expected. As they prepared to move toward the service elevators, the lights in the hospital began flickering in a pattern, 3 long flashes, followed by 2 short ones. The pattern repeated from different sections of the building. Marcus recognized it immediately from his military training. That's a coordination signal, he said, his voice tense. They're communicating with each other across the building. The group realized they had severely underestimated their enemy. These weren't just infected humans driven by hunger, they were evolving into something far more dangerous. The creatures had retained enough cognitive function to organize, strategize, and adapt their tactics based on human responses. Dr. Chen's research notes suddenly made terrifying sense. The infection wasn't destroying the brain, it was rewiring it. Moving through the hospital's service corridors, they encountered other survivors who had had similar realizations. Tom Bradley, a maintenance worker who knew every inch of the building, joined their group along with 2 other staff members. He led them through a maze of steam pipes and electrical conduits, his flashlight cutting through the darkness as they descended toward the basement levels. The basement revealed the true horror of the situation. The infected had somehow accessed the lower levels and were systematically searching every room, every hiding place. They moved with purpose, checking corners and spaces that random wandering would never have revealed. Some appeared to be marking walls with strange symbols, creating a crude but effective mapping system. They're learning the building layout, Tom whispered in disbelief. Just like we are. The realization hit the group like a physical blow. Their enemies weren't just strong and relentless, they were intelligent enough to outthink traditional survival strategies. Every safe room, every secret passage, every clever hiding spot could eventually be discovered and marked. The group's first major loss came when they encountered a pack of infected in the subbasement. Tom had been leading them toward the tunnel entrance when they were ambushed by creatures that had clearly been waiting in planned positions. The attack was swift and coordinated. While some infected created a distraction at the front, others moved to cut off their escape route from behind. In the chaos that followed, Tom made the ultimate sacrifice, using his knowledge of the building systems to trigger a steam release that created enough confusion for the others to escape. His last words were a shouted direction to the tunnel entrance, his voice lost in the hiss of scalding vapor and the inhuman shrieks of the temporarily blinded infected. The survivors found themselves in the abandoned subway station, a vast underground space that had been closed for renovations years earlier. The platform stretched into darkness, filled with construction equipment and half-finished improvements that now served as both shelter and potential weapons. Elena worked to treat the injuries they had sustained during the escape, while Jake and Marcus explored the area to assess their defensive options. Dr. Chin discovered something that changed everything. Among the construction materials, she found recent scratches on the walls, marks that looked disturbingly similar to the symbols they had seen the infected making in the hospital. They've been here, she announced, her voice hollow with realization. The infected have been using these tunnels too. This isn't just a safe house, it's part of their territory. The group understood that their war with the undead had entered a new phase. The infected were not just surviving, they were claiming territory, establishing control, and building their own society in the ruins of the old world. The question was no longer just about escaping the city, it was about whether humanity could adapt fast enough to survive against an enemy that was evolving with every passing hour. As they settled in for what might be their last night of relative safety, the sound of systematic tapping echoed through the tunnel system. The infected were mapping the underground network, preparing for the next phase of their conquest. The abandoned subway station had become their fortress, but Dr. Chen couldn't shake the feeling that they were living in borrowed time. The systematic tapping they had heard the night before had stopped, replaced by an unsettling silence that seemed to press against them from all directions. Marcus had established a watch rotation, positioning himself and Jake at different vantage points throughout the platform, while Elena tended to the group's medical needs with their dwindling supplies. 3 days into their underground existence, they encountered their first fellow survivors. A group of 12 people emerged from the northern tunnel, led by a woman named Captain Lisa Morrison, a transit police officer who had been patrolling the subway system when the outbreak began. Her group had been surviving in the tunnels for over a week, and their approach to survival was drastically different from Dr. Chen's scientific methods. "You've been thinking like doctors and security guards," Captain Morrison explained as she surveyed their makeshift camp. "Down here you need to think like the infected. They're not just hunting randomly, they're building something. We've seen them constructing barriers, creating what looks like nests in the deeper tunnels." Her words sent a chill through the group as they realized their enemy wasn't just adapting, but actually building infrastructure. The captain's group had developed a harsh but effective survival strategy. They moved in complete silence, used the infected's own marking system to navigate safely, and had learned to mimic some of the creature's behavioral patterns to avoid detection. Most disturbing of all, they had discovered that the infected were sorting their human captives, keeping some alive for unknown purposes rather than immediately turning them. Margaret, despite her age, proved invaluable in understanding the tunnel system's layout. Her years of teaching geography helped her quickly memorize the complex network of passages, maintenance routes, and abandoned stations. She worked closely with Captain Morrison to identify potential escape routes, but their mapping revealed a troubling truth. The infected had systematically blocked most major exits, creating a maze with very few ways out. Jake volunteered for the most dangerous job, scouting the deeper tunnels to gather intelligence about infected movements and territory. His youth and agility made him ideal for moving through tight spaces and ventilation systems. What he discovered during his reconnaissance missions painted a terrifying picture of their enemy's evolution. The infected had established a hierarchical system, with some creatures clearly directing others in complex tasks like tunnel modification and resource gathering. The most shocking discovery came when Jake witnessed infected individuals working together to repair damaged sections of the tunnel system. They were using tools, following what appeared to be planned sequences, and even posting guards while work was completed. "They're not just surviving," Jake reported back to the group. "They're building a civilization down here." Resource scarcity forced both groups to make increasingly difficult decisions. Water was becoming contaminated in sections controlled by the infected, and their food supplies were running dangerously low. Captain Morrison's group had a strict rationing system, but they had also discovered that some infected areas contained hoarded supplies taken from the surface. The question became whether the potential rewards justified the extreme risks of raiding infected territory. The moral complexity of their situation deepened when they encountered a group of infected that appeared to be caring for human children. Elena insisted they attempt a rescue, but Captain Morrison argued that any intervention would compromise their position and likely result in everyone's death. The debate split both groups, with some supporting immediate action while others prioritized long-term survival. Dr. Chen made a breakthrough in understanding the infection's progression by studying samples she had collected from the hospital. The virus wasn't just reanimating dead tissue, it was creating a new form of collective intelligence. Individual infected retained fragments of their human memories and skills, but were now connected through some form of biological communication network. This explained their coordinated behavior and rapid adaptation to human tactics. The discovery of their biological communication system led to both hope and despair. While it suggested potential vulnerabilities that humans could exploit, it also meant that every encounter with the infected was essentially an encounter with their entire network. Any tactical advantage gained in one location would quickly be transmitted to infected groups throughout the tunnel system. As tensions between the two survivor groups reached a breaking point, they detected signs of infected activity directly above their hiding spot. The creatures had apparently been observing their movements and were now preparing to breach their sanctuary. The systematic scratching sounds from the ceiling indicated that the infected were methodically weakening the structure above them. Captain Morrison made a command decision that would define their survival strategy going forward. "We can't keep running from them," she announced. "They're learning faster than we are. Our only chance is to find their central hub and disrupt their communication network." The plan was desperate and dangerous, but it represented their first opportunity to take offensive action against an enemy that had been consistently outmaneuvering them. The group prepared for what might be their most crucial mission yet, a direct assault on the infected's underground stronghold, where they hoped to discover the source of their collective intelligence and find a way to turn the tide of this underground war. The alliance between the two survivor groups had always been fragile, held together by necessity rather than trust. As they prepared for their mission to locate the infected central hub, underlying tensions began to surface in ways that would prove more dangerous than any zombie threat they had faced. Captain Morrison's military approach clashed with Dr. Chen's scientific methods, while resource scarcity pushed both groups toward increasingly desperate measures. The breaking point came when they discovered a cache of medical supplies in an abandoned maintenance room. Elena immediately began cataloging antibiotics and surgical equipment that could save lives, but Captain Morrison's group claimed priority based on their longer survival in the tunnels. The argument escalated when Margaret collapsed from exhaustion and dehydration, requiring immediate medical attention that would consume a significant portion of their newly found resources. Jake had been monitoring the infected's movements through the ventilation system when he overheard a conversation that changed everything. Two members of Captain Morrison's group, Rodriguez and Stevens, were discussing a plan to abandon the combined mission and instead lead the infected directly to Dr. Chen's group. Their reasoning was brutally pragmatic. Sacrificing the smaller group would buy them time to escape while the infected were distracted. The moral complexity deepened when Jake realized that Rodriguez had a sick daughter in Morrison's group, and Stevens was caring for his elderly father. Their betrayal wasn't born from malice but from the desperate love of people trying to protect their families. The revelation forced Jake to confront the harsh reality that survival often required impossible choices between competing loyalties. Dr. Chen's scientific approach to the crisis had been systematic and logical, but it had also been slow to adapt to the human elements of their situation. When she discovered evidence of the planned betrayal through Jake's intelligence, she faced her own moral crisis. Should she expose the plot and risk splitting their group when they needed unity most? Or should she try to find a solution that protected everyone while maintaining their fragile alliance? The infected had been systematically probing their defenses, using increasingly sophisticated tactics that suggested they were learning from each encounter. Elena noticed that the creatures' behavior patterns were becoming more human-like, with some individuals displaying problem-solving skills that rivaled their own. This evolution made their planned offensive mission increasingly dangerous, as the infected were no longer predictable in their responses. Marcus had been training the civilians in basic combat techniques, but the stress of their situation was taking its toll on everyone's psychological state. Margaret, despite her wisdom and experience, was struggling with the physical demands of underground survival. Her condition was deteriorating rapidly, and the group faced the terrible reality that they might have to make decisions about who could be saved and who would be left behind. The betrayal unfolded during what should have been a routine scouting mission. Rodriguez and Stevens had volunteered to check the northern tunnel approach, but instead they began making noise designed to attract infected attention toward the main group's position. Their plan was to create enough chaos that they could escape with their families while the infected overwhelmed the others. Captain Morrison discovered the betrayal just as the infected began converging on their position. The creatures moved with unprecedented coordination, suggesting they had been observing the survivors' routine and had planned their attack accordingly. The realization that they were facing both human treachery and evolved zombie intelligence created a crisis that threatened to destroy both groups entirely. Elena made a crucial decision that saved lives but came at enormous personal cost. She used her medical knowledge to create a diversion using the chemical supplies they had found, generating smoke and confusion that allowed most of the group to escape. However, her actions required her to remain behind to maintain the diversion, fully aware that she was likely sacrificing her own life for the others. The escape route led through sections of the tunnel system that had been partially collapsed by infected construction activities. The creatures had been systematically modifying the underground infrastructure, creating choke points and dead ends that served their tactical purposes. This forced the survivors to split into smaller groups, each taking different paths through the maze-like passages. Dr. Chen found herself separated from the main group with Jake and Margaret, while Marcus ended up with the remaining members of Captain Morrison's team. The infected's communication network allowed them to coordinate their pursuit across multiple tunnel branches, effectively hunting each group simultaneously while preventing them from reuniting. The betrayal had accomplished exactly what Rodriguez and Stevens had intended. It created chaos and confusion that allowed their families to escape. However, it also demonstrated the fragility of human cooperation under extreme stress and the ease with which survival instincts could override moral considerations. The infected, meanwhile, had gained valuable intelligence about human behavior and decision-making processes. As the separated groups struggled to survive in different sections of the tunnel system, they began to realize that their greatest enemy might not be the infected themselves, but the breakdown of human trust and cooperation that made organized resistance impossible. The war for survival had become as much about preserving humanity's social bonds as it was about fighting an external threat. Dr. Chin, Jake, and Margaret had been wandering the tunnel system for 2 days when they heard the unmistakable sound of coordinated gunfire echoing through the passages. Unlike the panicked shooting they had witnessed during the initial outbreak, this was disciplined, tactical engagement that suggested organized military resistance. Following the sound led them through a series of maintenance corridors to a heavily fortified subway station that had been converted into a military command post. Colonel James Mitchell had transformed the abandoned central station into a fortress, complete with defensive positions, communication equipment, and sleeping quarters for nearly 50 survivors. His unit, the 3rd Infantry Division, had been conducting urban warfare training when the outbreak began, giving them a crucial advantage in adapting to the new reality. The colonel's weathered face showed the strain of weeks spent fighting an enemy that defied conventional military doctrine. The integration of civilian survivors into the military structure created immediate challenges. Marcus, with his security background, quickly found his place within the command hierarchy, but Dr. Chen's scientific approach sometimes conflicted with military efficiency. Jake's youth and agility made him valuable for reconnaissance missions, while Margaret's knowledge of the city's layout proved essential for strategic planning. Colonel Mitchell briefed the newcomers on what his unit had learned about the infection's true nature. Government communications had revealed that the outbreak wasn't accidental. It was the result of a biological weapons experiment that had gone catastrophically wrong. The infected weren't just random victims. They were the product of an engineered virus designed to create enhanced soldiers, but the project had spiraled beyond all control. The military's initial response had been based on traditional zombie mythology, slow, mindless creatures that could be contained through firepower and barriers. However, Colonel Mitchell's unit had discovered that these infected were nothing like the monsters from popular culture. They retained tactical intelligence, could use basic tools, and most disturbing of all, they were continuing to evolve with each passing day. Dr. Chen's medical expertise became crucial when she examined tissue samples the military had collected. Her analysis revealed that the virus was rewriting human DNA in real time, creating hybrid organisms that combined human intelligence with enhanced physical capabilities. The infected weren't just surviving, they were becoming something entirely new, potentially superior to baseline humanity in many ways. The military stronghold had been conducting raids on infected territory, but these operations revealed disturbing developments in enemy capabilities. The creatures had begun using abandoned military equipment, displaying understanding of weapons systems and tactical formations. Some infected appeared to be wearing makeshift armor and carrying crude but effective weapons fashioned from scavenged materials. Training civilian survivors for combat operations proved more challenging than expected. Elena, who had been presumed lost in the tunnel collapse, arrived at the stronghold with valuable intelligence about infected behavior patterns. Her medical training made her an excellent field medic, but adapting to combat situations required overcoming years of conditioning to preserve life rather than take it. The colonel's strategy involved establishing a network of secure positions throughout the city, creating safe corridors for civilian evacuation while simultaneously gathering intelligence about infected leadership structures. His reconnaissance teams had identified what appeared to be command centers where highly evolved infected were coordinating large-scale operations across multiple city sectors. Jake's scouting missions revealed that the infected had established a complex social hierarchy, with different classes of creatures performing specialized functions. Some served as builders, modifying urban infrastructure to suit their needs. Others acted as hunters, tracking human survivors with methodical precision. Most concerning were the leaders, infected individuals who retained near-human intelligence while possessing enhanced physical capabilities. Margaret's role evolved from survivor to strategic advisor when her teaching background proved invaluable for understanding the infected's learning patterns. She helped develop training programs that taught other survivors to think like their enemies, anticipating infected tactics and developing countermeasures. Her insights into human psychology also helped maintain morale during the darkest moments. The military's major offensive was planned as a coordinated assault on 3 infected strongholds simultaneously. The strategy aimed to disrupt their communication networks while rescuing human captives who were being held in what appeared to be research facilities. Intelligence suggested the infected were conducting their own experiments on human subjects, possibly trying to create more efficient hybrid organisms. Dr. Chen made a breakthrough discovery when analyzing the infected's biological communication system. The creatures weren't just sharing information, they were actually merging consciousness on some level, creating a collective intelligence that grew stronger with each new infection. This explained their rapid adaptation and coordinated responses to human tactics. The preparation for the offensive revealed both the strengths and weaknesses of their mixed civilian military force. While the soldiers provided discipline and tactical expertise, the civilians brought creativity and adaptability that purely military thinking sometimes lacked. The infected's continued evolution meant that conventional military strategies needed constant modification to remain effective. As the assault teams prepared for their most ambitious operation yet, Colonel Mitchell emphasized that they weren't just fighting for survival anymore, they were fighting to determine which species would inherit the Earth. The infected had proven they could build, learn, and adapt, but humanity's greatest advantage remained their ability to cooperate and sacrifice for future generations. The sunrise painted the city skyline in shades of orange and red as Colonel Mitchell's forces prepared for Operation Breakout, their most ambitious mission yet. The Manhattan Bridge had become the key strategic objective. Its capture would secure the primary evacuation route for thousands of civilians trapped in the city's outer boroughs. Intelligence reports indicated that the infected had transformed the bridge into a heavily fortified checkpoint, using abandoned vehicles and construction materials to create defensive positions that rivaled military engineering. Dr. Chen had spent the night analyzing the infected's defensive patterns, using her scientific background to identify potential weaknesses in their seemingly impenetrable barrier system. Her discovery was both encouraging and terrifying. The creatures were using architectural principles that suggested they retained complex engineering knowledge from their human lives. This intelligence, combined with Jake's reconnaissance reports, revealed that the infected had essentially created a fortress that could withstand conventional assault. The assault team consisted of 32 fighters, including both experienced soldiers and civilian volunteers who had been trained in urban combat techniques. Marcus led the Northern Approach team, his security experience proving invaluable for coordinating movement through the bridge's complex support structure. Elena served as field medic for the Central Assault Group, her medical training adapted to treat combat injuries in hostile territory. Margaret had remained at the stronghold to coordinate communications and provide strategic oversight, her teaching background helping her manage the complex logistics of a multi-pronged assault. Her role had evolved from survivor to mission commander, using her understanding of human psychology to maintain morale and coordination among the diverse group of fighters. The infected's defensive capabilities exceeded every prediction. As the assault teams approached the bridge, they encountered sophisticated early warning systems that the creatures had constructed using salvaged electronics and their own biological communication network. The infected didn't just detect the approaching humans, they anticipated their tactical movements and prepared coordinated countermeasures. Jake's team discovered that the infected had evolved new physical adaptations specifically for combat situations. Some creatures displayed enhanced strength and agility that allowed them to move through the bridge's superstructure with spider-like efficiency. Others had developed improved sensory capabilities, detecting human presence through methods that conventional camouflage couldn't defeat. The battle began at dawn with a coordinated artillery barrage designed to disrupt the infected's communication network. However, the creature's response demonstrated tactical sophistication that shocked even the experienced military personnel. Instead of scattering randomly, the infected executed defensive maneuvers that suggested they had been studying human military doctrine and developing countermeasures. Dr. Chen's team made a crucial discovery during the assault when they encountered infected individuals who were operating complex machinery with near-human efficiency. These creatures were maintaining generators, operating radio equipment, and even performing basic repairs on their defensive installations. The implications were staggering. The infected weren't just surviving, they were building a technological civilization. The human assault encountered its first major setback when the infected revealed they had been stockpiling military-grade weapons taken from fallen soldiers and abandoned military positions. The creatures demonstrated disturbing proficiency with firearms, explosives, and tactical equipment, suggesting they retained muscle memory and technical knowledge from their human lives. Elena's medical team faced unprecedented challenges as they treated wounded fighters while under constant threat from infected forces that seemed to target medical personnel specifically. The creatures appeared to understand the psychological impact of preventing humans from caring for their wounded, using this knowledge as a weapon to demoralize the assault forces. The turning point came when Marcus's team discovered that the infected's communication network had a critical vulnerability. The creature's collective intelligence, while powerful, created dependencies that could be exploited. By targeting specific infected individuals who appeared to serve as communication hubs, the human forces could temporarily disrupt coordination across entire sections of the bridge. Colonel Mitchell made the difficult decision to authorize the use of explosive charges that would damage the bridge's structure but create gaps in the infected's defensive perimeter. The strategy required precise timing and coordination, with assault teams advancing through breach points while support units provided covering fire from multiple angles. The battle's climax occurred when Jake volunteered for the most dangerous mission, infiltrating the infected Central Command position to plant charges that would destroy their primary communication hub. His youth and agility allowed him to navigate through the bridge's support cables while avoiding detection, but the mission required him to operate alone in territory controlled by the most evolved infected individuals. The human victory came at enormous cost. While they successfully secured the bridge and opened the evacuation route, the battle claimed the lives of 12 fighters and revealed that the infected were continuing to evolve at an accelerated pace. The creature's tactical adaptations during the battle suggested they were learning from the engagement in real time, incorporating human strategies into their own defensive doctrine. As civilian evacuations began across the secured bridge, the survivors realized that their victory was temporary. The infected had demonstrated capabilities that fundamentally changed the nature of their conflict, evolving from a survival horror scenario into a war between two intelligent species competing for control of the same territory. The bridge battle had proven that humans could still win individual engagements, but the infected's rapid adaptation meant that each victory would be harder to achieve than the last. The evacuation route across the Manhattan Bridge had provided only temporary relief. Within 72 hours of their hard-fought victory, reconnaissance teams began reporting disturbing developments that suggested the infected had not only learned from their defeat but had accelerated their evolutionary adaptation in response to human tactics. Dr. Chen's worst fears were being realized. The collective intelligence was using each encounter as a learning opportunity, rapidly developing countermeasures that threatened to make human resistance obsolete. Colonel Mitchell's command post buzzed with urgent activity as reports flooded in from observation teams positioned throughout the city. The infected had begun constructing what could only be described as weapons manufacturing facilities, using salvaged materials and their enhanced cognitive abilities to create tools of war. Jake's reconnaissance mission to the industrial district revealed assembly lines where infected workers were producing crude but effective firearms, explosives, and even basic armor systems. Margaret had been analyzing patterns in the infected's behavioral evolution when she made a chilling discovery. The creatures weren't just randomly adapting, they were following a systematic development program that suggested long-term strategic planning. Her teaching background helped her recognize the methodical approach the infected were using to study human weaknesses and develop targeted solutions for each military tactic the survivors employed. The most alarming development came when Dr. Chen's analysis of captured infected tissue revealed accelerated genetic modification occurring at the cellular level. The virus wasn't just rewriting human DNA anymore, it was actively engineering new biological capabilities in response to environmental pressures. Some infected individuals were developing enhanced sensory organs that could detect human presence through walls, while others were growing specialized appendages designed for tool use and weapon manipulation. Elena's medical team encountered the first evidence of infected leadership hierarchy when they treated a wounded soldier who described creatures wearing distinctive markings and directing other infected with complex hand signals. These leader-class infected appeared to retain the strategic thinking capabilities of military commanders while possessing the enhanced physical attributes that made them nearly impossible to defeat in direct combat. The infected's new technological capabilities became apparent when they began using communications equipment to intercept and decode human radio transmissions. Marcus discovered that the creatures were not only listening to military communications but were actively jamming human frequencies while establishing their own communication networks. The tactical advantage that radio coordination had provided was rapidly disappearing. Jake's most dangerous mission yet involved infiltrating an infected research facility where the creatures appeared to be conducting experiments on captured humans. What he discovered challenged everything the survivors thought they knew about their enemies' motivations. The infected weren't just trying to survive or expand their territory, they were attempting to create hybrid organisms that combined the best attributes of both species. The experimental facility revealed that some infected individuals had retained enough scientific knowledge to conduct complex biological research. They were using human subjects to test different viral modifications, essentially using their captives as laboratory specimens to refine their own evolution. The implications were staggering. the infected were actively trying to improve themselves while simultaneously studying human biology for weaknesses. Dr. Chen's breakthrough came when she realized that the infected's collective intelligence was structured like a vast neural network, with individual creatures serving as nodes that processed and shared information across the entire population. This explained their rapid adaptation and coordinated responses, but it also suggested a potential vulnerability. If the network could be disrupted at key nodes, the entire system might collapse. The race against time intensified when observation teams reported that infected groups were beginning to coordinate activities across multiple cities. The collective intelligence wasn't limited to local populations, it was creating a continental network that could share tactical knowledge and strategic information across vast distances. Every human victory in one location was immediately transmitted to infected populations everywhere. Margaret's strategic analysis revealed that the infected were preparing for a final offensive that would overwhelm the remaining human strongholds through sheer coordinated force. The creatures had learned that humans were most vulnerable when separated from their support networks, and they were systematically targeting communication centers, supply lines, and evacuation routes to isolate survivor groups. Colonel Mitchell faced an impossible decision when intelligence reports confirmed that the infected had begun using human captives as living shields during attacks, exploiting the survivors' reluctance to harm innocent people. The creatures had learned that human compassion was a tactical weakness that could be weaponized, forcing difficult choices between military effectiveness and moral principles. The final revelation came when Dr. Chin discovered that the infected were preparing to release a new version of the virus, one designed specifically to target the remaining human population while being harmless to those who had already been infected. The creatures weren't just trying to defeat humanity in battle. They were preparing to replace the human species entirely through biological warfare. As the survivors prepared for what might be their last stand, they realized that their enemy had evolved beyond anything they had imagined possible. The infected had become a new form of life that combined human intelligence with enhanced physical capabilities and perfect coordination. The question was no longer whether humanity could survive the zombie apocalypse, but whether the human species would continue to exist in any recognizable form. The final evacuation point at Liberty Island had become humanity's last beacon of hope, but it was also the stage for the most decisive battle in the species' history. Colonel Mitchell's remaining forces had consolidated with survivor groups from across the region, creating a mixed army of military personnel, civilian volunteers, and refugees who understood that failure meant the end of human civilization. The infected had surrounded the island with a flotilla of commandeered boats and makeshift vessels, demonstrating naval coordination that defied every assumption about their capabilities. Dr. Chen's analysis of the infected's new virus had revealed a terrifying timeline. The creatures planned to release their species-ending biological weapon within hours, using the wind patterns and tidal currents around Liberty Island to spread it across the entire eastern seaboard. Her scientific team worked frantically to develop countermeasures, but the virus had been engineered using human knowledge combined with the infected's enhanced biological understanding, making it nearly impossible to neutralize with conventional methods. Marcus had assumed field command of the defensive operations, coordinating between regular military units and civilian fighters who had proven their worth in previous battles. His security background proved invaluable as he established overlapping fields of fire and created defensive positions that could withstand the coordinated assault that intelligence suggested was imminent. The infected's tactical sophistication meant that traditional defensive strategies needed constant innovation to remain effective. The unexpected alliance emerged when Captain Morrison's group, presumed lost weeks earlier, arrived at Liberty Island with crucial intelligence about the infected's command structure. Their survival had come at enormous cost, but they had discovered the location of the primary network hub, a converted research facility where the most evolved infected individuals were coordinating the final assault on human civilization. Jake volunteered for the most dangerous mission in human history, infiltrating the infected's command center to plant explosives that would disrupt their collective intelligence network. His youth and proven ability to operate in infected territory made him the logical choice, but the mission required him to penetrate deeper into enemy-controlled territory than any human had attempted. The infected's enhanced senses and communication abilities made stealth virtually impossible, turning the mission into a suicide run. Elena's medical team faced their ultimate test when the infected began using psychological warfare, broadcasting the screams and pleas of human captives to demoralize the defenders. Her training in trauma medicine proved essential as she treated not just physical wounds but the psychological damage that threatened to break the survivors' will to fight. The infected had learned that human empathy could be weaponized, But Elena's compassion became a source of strength that helped maintain morale during the darkest moments. Margaret's strategic oversight proved crucial when she identified a pattern in the infected's assault preparations that suggested they were vulnerable during the transition between coordination phases. Her teaching background helped her recognize that the collective intelligence, while powerful, had to reorganize itself when switching between different operational modes. This brief window of vulnerability offered humanity its only chance for victory. The battle's climax occurred when the infected launched their final assault just as Jake reached the command center. The creatures attacked with unprecedented coordination, using weapons, tactics, and strategies that combined human military doctrine with their own evolutionary advantages. The defensive positions that had seemed impregnable were systematically overwhelmed by an enemy that had learned from every previous engagement. Dr. Chen made the ultimate sacrifice when she realized that the only way to stop the virus release was to manually trigger a containment protocol that would destroy the infected's biological weapons facility along with anyone inside. Her scientific knowledge and moral courage drove her to accept a mission that would save humanity while ending her own life, demonstrating that human values could triumph over survival instincts. The turning point came when Jake successfully disrupted the infected's communication network, causing temporary chaos in their coordinated assault. The collective intelligence that had been their greatest advantage became a liability when key nodes were destroyed, creating confusion that allowed the human defenders to regain tactical initiative. The infected's rapid adaptation abilities couldn't compensate for the sudden loss of their coordination systems. Colonel Mitchell's final gambit involved using the infected's own technological capabilities against them, broadcasting a signal that overloaded their biological communication network and caused system-wide disruption. The strategy was based on Dr. Chen's research into the viral modification process, using the infected's enhanced connectivity to deliver a feedback loop that temporarily incapacitated large numbers of creatures. The resolution remained ambiguous, reflecting the ongoing nature of humanity's struggle for survival. While the immediate threat had been neutralized and the species-ending virus contained, small groups of infected remained scattered across the world, continuing to evolve and adapt. The survivors had proven that human ingenuity, cooperation, and moral courage could overcome seemingly impossible odds, but the victory came at enormous cost. As the evacuation ships departed Liberty Island, the survivors understood that they had won a crucial battle but not the war. The infected's evolutionary capabilities meant that the threat would persist, requiring constant vigilance and adaptation. However, humanity had also proven its own capacity for growth, demonstrating that cooperation and sacrifice could overcome even the most formidable challenges. The future remained uncertain, but hope survived alongside the human spirit that had carried them through their darkest hour.